Mechanic fixes boy's bike for free, without knowing he was a billionaire's son. Frank Miller was closing up his small repair shop when he saw the boy walking slowly down the sidewalk, pushing a red bike with a flat tire. Sweat dripped down the man's face after a long day of work, but something about the child's sad demeanor made him pause. The boy couldn't have been more than 9 years old and held the bike carefully, as if it were his most prized possession. Frank noticed the child glancing at his shop with hope, but seemed hesitant to approach. "Hey there, son. Something happened to your bike?" Frank asked, wiping his hands on the rag he always kept in his pocket. The boy stepped forward slowly, as if afraid of being turned away. "Sir, do you think you can fix it?" he asked in a small voice. "I have a little money here." Frank looked at the bike and quickly saw that besides the flat tire, the chain was loose and needed adjusting. It would be a simple repair, but it was already past 6 in the evening, and he had promised his wife he'd come home early. "Of course I can fix it, kid. What's your name?" "Ethan, sir." "Nice to meet you, Ethan. I'm Frank. Let's take a look at this bike." Frank reopened the shop doors and placed the bike on the workbench. Ethan watched him intently, amazed at how easily the mechanic handled the tools. His experienced hands worked with precision, removing the damaged tire. "You live around here, Ethan? I've never seen you before." The boy hesitated before answering. "No, sir. I come from far away, but I like riding my bike around here. It's quieter than near my house." Frank noticed the boy's clothes were simple but well made. There was something different about him, a politeness not common among kids in the area, but he decided not to press further. As he worked, Frank thought of his own daughter, Emily, who was Ethan's age. She was at home helping her mother with chores, since their family couldn't afford a bike like this one. "All done, Ethan. Your bike's as good as new?" The boy smiled in a way that lit up his whole face. "How much do I owe you, Mr. Frank?" Frank looked at the coins Ethan held in his small hand. It wasn't even half the cost of a basic repair, but there was something in those eyes that moved him deeply. "No charge, son. Happy to help." "But sir, you worked. You should get paid." "Ethan, I have a kid your age. If he were in trouble somewhere, I'd want someone to help him too." Truthfully, Frank had lied. Emily was his daughter, not his son, but something kept him from sharing details about his family, maybe instinct or just caution with strangers. Ethan pocketed the coins and climbed onto the bike. Before leaving, he looked at Frank with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Frank, you're really kind." After the boy left, Frank locked up the shop and headed home. The whole way, he couldn't stop thinking about their encounter. There was something special about that kid, though he couldn't put his finger on it. At home, his wife Jennifer was making dinner while Emily did her homework at the kitchen table. Frank told them about the boy with the bike, but left out the details that puzzled him. "You did the right thing, honey," Jennifer said. "We've always taught our kids to help those in need." The next morning, Frank opened the shop as he had for the past 15 years. The neighborhood of Hope Springs was modest, but he knew almost everyone there. His shop sat on a busy street where many workers passed on their way downtown. Around 10 o'clock, a black limousine pulled up in front of the repair shop. Frank looked up from the engine he was repairing, surprised to see such a luxurious vehicle on that humble street. A well-dressed man in a dark suit stepped out of the car and walked toward the garage. He appeared to be around 40, with neatly trimmed hair and an air of authority that was hard to miss. "Good morning, I'm looking for the mechanic Frank Miller." "That's me. How can I help you?" The man extended his hand with a formal smile. "My name is Jonathan Bennett. Yesterday, you fixed my son Ethan's bicycle." Frank felt a tightness in his chest. Now he understood why the boy seemed different from the other kids in the neighborhood. "Yes, I did. Ethan is a polite boy. I came to pay you for the service and also to make you an offer." Jonathan pulled a thick envelope from his pocket and handed it to Frank. "There's no need, Mr. Jonathan. I didn't charge your son anything, and I won't charge you either. I insist. And besides, I'd like to offer you a job as my personal driver. The salary would be much higher than what you earn here." Frank looked at the envelope without touching it. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept. I have my garage and my customers here in the neighborhood. They depend on me." Jonathan seemed surprised by the refusal. "Mr. Frank, I'm offering you a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You could change your life, give your family a better situation." "My life is fine just the way it is, Mr. Jonathan. I have my honest work, and that's enough for me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Jonathan persisted for a few more minutes, even doubling his offer, but Frank stood firm. The businessman left the garage puzzled. He was used to getting whatever he wanted with money, but this simple mechanic had left him speechless. In the following days, Ethan returned to the garage a few times. Frank learned that the boy ran away from home to play in the neighborhood because, in his mansion, he had no friends his age. The child was always alone, surrounded only by servants and security guards. "Uncle Frank, can I stay here for a while?" Ethan would ask whenever he showed up. "Of course, Ethan. But do your parents know where you are? My dad is always working, and my mom—" The boy hesitated. "She doesn't live with us anymore." Frank pitied the boy's loneliness. He let Ethan stay around, watching him work and asking small questions about the repairs. He was pleasant company and reminded Frank of how he wished he had a son to teach his trade to. Jennifer began noticing that her husband was coming home later some days. "Is something going on, Frank? You've been acting different." "It's that boy, Jennifer, Ethan. He shows up at the garage alone with nothing to do. He reminds me a lot of how I was as a kid." Frank had lost his father very young and was raised by his mother in difficult circumstances. Maybe that's why he related so much to the rich boy's loneliness. Meanwhile, Jonathan Bennett started investigating Frank's life. He hired a private detective to learn more about the mechanic who had refused his offer. He wanted to understand what motivated this simple man. The report he received surprised him. Frank Miller, 38 years old, married to Jennifer Miller, father of 9-year-old Emily Miller. Owner of the garage for 15 years, inherited from his father-in-law, who taught him the trade. Known in the neighborhood for his honesty and always helping those in need. Never involved in shady dealings, trusted by the entire community. But what caught Jonathan's attention the most was discovering that Frank often fixed vehicles for free for those who couldn't afford to pay. There were stories of early mornings spent fixing the baker's car so he could deliver bread, or the time he repaired the medicine delivery man's motorcycle for free. Jonathan couldn't understand such generosity. In his world, no one did anything without expecting something in return. He decided to observe Frank more closely. For 2 weeks, Jonathan passed by the garage several times, always in different cars to avoid being recognized. He saw Frank working from dawn till dusk, always with a smile for his customers. He also noticed how the people in the neighborhood treated him with warmth and respect. What struck Jonathan the most was witnessing Frank pulling money from his own pocket to lend to an elderly woman so she could buy medicine, after having fixed her bicycle for free. That night, Jonathan talked to Ethan about his visits to the garage. "Why do you like going there so much, son?" "Because Uncle Frank talks to me, Dad. He teaches me things and doesn't tell me to be quiet all the time." Jonathan felt a pang of guilt. He realized he was missing important moments of his son's childhood because of his excessive work. "Ethan, what if I tried to convince Frank to work here at home? That way you could spend more time with him." "No, Dad, if he comes to work here, he'll be just like the other employees. He'd have to wear a uniform and wouldn't be able to talk to me like a friend." His son's innocence made Jonathan reflect. Ethan had understood something that he, with all his business experience, couldn't see. The next day, Jonathan returned to the garage, but this time with a different approach. "Mr. Frank, may I speak with you privately?" Frank wiped his hands and followed Jonathan to a quieter corner of the garage. "I want to understand something. Why did you refuse my offer? It's not about money. I can pay whatever it takes." Frank sighed before answering. "Mr. Jonathan, have you ever stopped to think why your son comes here alone? Why he prefers a dirty garage over your mansion?" Jonathan didn't know how to respond. "Ethan comes here because he wants to feel normal. He wants to be treated like any other kid, not like the son of the richest man in town. If I worked for you, I'd lose that naturalness. I'd just be another employee. But you could give your family a better life. My family already has a good life, Mr. Jonathan. Maybe we don't have much money, but we have something your money can't buy. What? Peace, togetherness, simplicity. My daughter plays outside with her friends. My wife knows all the neighbors. I wake up every day knowing my work helps people in my community. Jonathan fell silent for a few seconds. What could I do so my son could have that too? Only you can answer that, Mr. Jonathan. In that conversation, Jonathan began to understand there was something deeper behind Frank's refusal. It wasn't stubbornness or pride, but a completely different philosophy of life. Still, Jonathan wasn't a man who gave up easily. If he couldn't have Frank as an employee, he'd try another approach. He started visiting the garage area more often, always finding excuses to talk to Frank. Sometimes it was a problem with the company car. Other times, he came to pick up Ethan, who kept visiting the garage regularly. Jennifer began noticing the wealthy man's constant presence at her husband's garage. Frank, don't you think it's strange how often that man shows up here? I think he's just trying to get closer to his son. Maybe he realized he was losing the boy, but Jennifer had a bad feeling. She'd known her husband for 20 years and could tell when something was troubling him. Actually, Frank was also puzzled by Jonathan's persistence. Why would a billionaire waste so much time trying to convince a simple mechanic to work for him? The answer came a few weeks later, in a way Frank could never have imagined. It was a Thursday afternoon when Jennifer showed up at the shop with Emily. They were coming back from school and decided to stop by to pick Frank up early. Ethan was there as usual, watching Frank change the oil in a car. When he saw Emily, he got curious. "Uncle Frank, who is she?" "This is my daughter, Emily. Emily, this is Ethan, the one I've told you about." The two children greeted each other shyly. Emily was impressed by Ethan's red bicycle, while he found it interesting to finally meet Uncle Frank's daughter. Jennifer watched the children interact and then whispered to her husband, "Frank, is that boy the son of that rich man you mentioned?" "Yes, he is. He seems so lonely. Poor thing." That's when Jonathan arrived to pick up Ethan. When he saw Frank's family together, something shifted in his expression. Jennifer introduced herself politely, as did Emily. Jonathan noticed the genuine simplicity of that family, the affectionate way they treated each other, the natural way they included Ethan in the conversation. "Ethan, it's time to go," said Jonathan. "Oh, Dad, already? I was talking to Emily. She said she likes riding bikes too." "Maybe another day you two can play together," Jennifer suggested, without any ulterior motive. Jonathan was surprised by the spontaneous invitation. He was used to people approaching him for some benefit, but Jennifer seemed genuinely interested in the children having fun. On the way home, Ethan couldn't stop talking about Emily and how great it would be to have a friend to play with. "Dad, can Emily come over to our house someday?" Jonathan hesitated. His mansion was a world completely different from what that girl knew. He was afraid the social differences might create awkwardness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, maybe it's better if you play here in the neighborhood, Ethan. Why? Jonathan couldn't explain without sounding prejudiced. Deep down, he knew the problem wasn't the social differences, but how he himself viewed them. That night, Jonathan had a difficult conversation with himself. He realized he was raising Ethan isolated from the real world, surrounded only by people who were paid to take care of him. The boy had no real friends, didn't know the simple joy of playing outside, and didn't understand the value of things because he'd never lacked anything. The next day, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. He showed up at Frank's shop early in the morning, before it even opened for customers. "Mr. Frank, can I propose something different?" Frank stopped what he was doing and gave the businessman his full attention. "What if instead of you working for me, I invested in your shop? You could expand the business, hire employees, serve more customers." Frank shook his head. "Mr. Jonathan, With all due respect, you don't understand. I don't want a big shop. I like my work just the way it is. I know every customer by name. I understand each one's needs. If it grows too much, I'll lose that closeness. But you could make a lot more money. And what do I need a lot more money for, Mr. Jonathan? To buy things I don't need? To have problems I don't have? My family is well fed, my daughter is in school, my wife is happy. What more do I need? Jonathan sat in an old chair in the corner of the shop. You know, Frank, you make me question everything I've built in my life. How so? I have everything money can buy, but my son would rather stay here with you than at home with me. There's something wrong with that. Frank noticed Jonathan was beginning to open up for real. Mr. Jonathan, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Are you happy? Jonathan stayed silent for a long time. I don't know what happiness is anymore, Frank. I always thought happiness was about success, making money, winning at life. But looking at you and your family, I see maybe I was wrong. Everyone has their own definition of happiness, Mr. Jonathan. For me, it's waking up every day knowing I'll do something useful, coming home to find my family well, being able to help someone in need. Ethan is growing up without me even noticing. By the time I realize it, he doesn't want to talk to me anymore. He'd rather stay here listening to your stories. Frank saw the anguish in Jonathan's eyes and felt compassion for the man. Mr. Jonathan, the problem isn't money, it's time. You spend more time taking care of money than taking care of your son. But I need to work to give him the best. The best thing you can give Ethan isn't money, it's attention. It's being present in his life. This conversation marked the beginning of a change in the relationship between Jonathan and Frank. The businessman started visiting the shop, not to convince Frank to work for him, but to learn about a different way of living. Jonathan began bringing Ethan to the shop on weekends and stayed there too, watching how Frank worked and interacted with people. He saw how the mechanic solved problems creatively, treating every customer with respect, regardless of social class. One Saturday, as Frank was teaching Ethan and Emily how to adjust bicycle brakes, Jonathan asked to join. Can I learn too? Frank was surprised but made sure to teach him. Jonathan, who was used to running big companies, found himself in the role of a student, trying to grasp basic mechanical concepts. It's harder than it looks, Jonathan remarked, laughing at his own struggle. Everything's hard at first, Mr. Jonathan, but with patience and practice, anyone can learn. Those moments became special for Ethan. For the first time, he was doing something with his father, learning side by side, without rush or pressure. Jennifer started preparing snacks for when Jonathan came with Ethan. She treated the businessman with the same warmth she showed everyone else. No formalities, no reverence. Mrs. Jennifer, you don't have to go to any trouble, Jonathan would say. What trouble? We always have coffee and cookies for visitors. That simplicity touched Jonathan deeply. In his mansion, everything was protocol and formality. Here in the shop, he was treated like an ordinary person, and it made him feel more human. But not everything was smooth. Jonathan's constant presence at the shop started raising eyebrows in the neighborhood. Some speculated about the rich businessman's interest in a simple mechanic. George, who ran a barber shop down the street, warned Frank, "Be careful, Frank, rich folks never do anything for free. That man must want something." Frank knew people talked, but it didn't bother him. He'd known Jonathan for months and could see the man was going through a genuine change, but suspicions grew when Jonathan made an unexpected proposal. "Frank, how about we organize an event here in the neighborhood? Maybe a party for the kids with free bicycle repairs." "What for, Mr. Jonathan?" "I want to give back for how you've welcomed me here, and Ethan would love to help organize it." Frank discussed the idea with Jennifer. "I don't know, Frank. Why does he want to spend money here in the neighborhood?" "I think he's trying to connect with the community, Jennifer. Maybe he wants Ethan to experience a different reality." After much thought, Frank accepted the proposal. The event was scheduled for a Saturday the following month, in the little square near the repair shop. Jonathan invested in a full setup, food stalls, toys for the kids, a professional bike repair station with top-notch tools. Frank was impressed by the organization. On the day of the event, dozens of families showed up. Jonathan and Ethan worked side by side with Frank. fixing bikes and chatting with people from the neighborhood. It was during this event that Jonathan got to know the community where Frank lived a little better. He spoke with the baker, who woke up at 3 in the morning to make fresh bread, the retired teacher who gave free tutoring, the deliveryman who supported 4 kids on his earnings. Each story moved him in a different way. He realized there was a richness here that couldn't be measured in money, the richness of human connections, solidarity, and mutual care. Ethan was beaming, playing with other kids, helping with bike repairs, eating popcorn like any boy his age. "Dad, can I come back to this neighborhood more often?" he asked at the end of the day. "Of course, son, if Uncle Frank allows it." Frank smiled and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're always welcome here, Ethan." After the event, the bond between Jonathan and Frank grew even stronger. The businessman started visiting the repair shop regularly, no longer as a client or someone looking to do business, but as a friend. Jennifer and Emily also grew accustomed to Jonathan and Ethan's presence. The two families, so different in background, began to grow closer naturally. But it was when a serious problem arose that the true nature of their friendship was tested. Jennifer started having constant stomach pains. At first, she thought it was just stress or something she ate, but the pain persisted for weeks. Frank convinced her to see a doctor at the neighborhood clinic. After some basic tests, the doctor ordered more detailed exams, which would take months to schedule through the public system. "Frank, these tests are important. We can't wait that long," said the private doctor Jennifer managed to see after great financial effort. That night, Frank barely slept. The cost of private exams meant months of work, but he couldn't risk his wife's health. The next day, he arrived at the shop, worried and downcast. Jonathan, who knew his friend well by now, could tell something was wrong. "Frank, are you okay?" Frank hesitated before explaining Jennifer's situation. He didn't want Jonathan to think he was asking for financial help. "I know everything will work out, Mr. Jonathan. We'll figure out a way to get the tests done." Jonathan was quiet for a few minutes. "Frank, can I ask you something? If it were Ethan who was sick, would you let your pride stop me from helping him?" "Of course not, Mr. Jonathan." "Then why are you stopping me from helping Jennifer?" Frank argued it was different, that he couldn't accept charity, that he'd always managed on his own. But Jonathan stood firm. "This isn't charity, Frank, it's friendship. When you fixed Ethan's bike for free, was that charity?" "No, it was what?" "It was kindness toward a child." "Then let me show kindness to your family too." After resisting for a long time, Frank finally accepted the help. Jonathan covered all of Jennifer's medical tests and even managed to schedule everything for the following week at one of the best labs in town. The results showed Jennifer had a serious condition that needed immediate treatment, but one that could be cured if handled properly. Jonathan didn't just pay for the treatment. He also made sure Jennifer had access to the best doctors. Frank tried to argue about how he'd repay it all, but Jonathan was firm. "Frank, the money I'm spending on Jennifer means less to me than the change you didn't charge for fixing Ethan's bike meant to you that day." "But it's so much money, Mr. Jonathan. And what you did for my son is priceless, Frank. Ethan has changed since he started coming here. He's more confident, happier, more human. That's worth far more than any amount of money." During Jennifer's treatment, which lasted several months, the two families grew even closer. Jonathan and Ethan spent hours in the shop, not just watching Frank work, but actually helping. Ethan learned to change tires, adjust brakes, and tune chains. Jonathan, in turn, discovered he had a knack for the administrative side, helping Frank better organize the shop's finances. "You know, Frank, you could earn 30% more if you managed your schedule better and charged fairer prices," Jonathan suggested one day. "But Mr. Jonathan, if I charge more, many people won't be able to afford it." "Then charge full price from those who can, and a sliding scale from those who can't. That way, you increase your income without excluding anyone." The idea made sense to Frank. Jonathan helped him implement a system where clients with better financial means paid full price, while those in need paid only for parts. The results were surprising. The shop's income improved without losing the community spirit it had always had. Jennifer made a full recovery. At the celebration they threw in her honor, she made sure to hug Jonathan. "Thank you for saving my life," she said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for teaching me how to live," Jonathan replied, equally moved. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. But the biggest change came months later when Jonathan made a decision that stunned everyone. "Frank, I want to make a different kind of proposal." "What is it, Mr. Jonathan?" "I want to reduce my workload at the company and spend more time here in the neighborhood, not as your boss or partner, but as someone who wants to learn a trade." Frank was speechless. "You want to work at the shop?" "I want to learn to be a mechanic, Frank. I want Ethan to see me working with my hands, creating something useful, helping real people." "But, Mr. Jonathan, you have a huge company to run." "I do, and it'll keep running. But I realized I built an empire without knowing why. I want Ethan to see that honest work is more important than easy money." Jonathan started coming to the shop as an apprentice. He arrived early in the morning, wore simple overalls, and learned from the ground up. Ethan beamed watching his father put in the effort, making mistakes, trying again, sweating and getting dirty like any worker. "Dad, you're getting good at this," Ethan would say whenever Jonathan managed a repair on his own. Jonathan's transformation didn't go unnoticed in the community. Those who had initially doubted his intentions began to respect him when they saw he wasn't there to promote himself or gain anything, but to genuinely learn and contribute. George, the barber, who'd been skeptical, told Frank, "Your friend's the real deal. Yesterday he fixed my granddaughter's bike and wouldn't take a dime." "How so, George?" "She got a flat playing in the street. Jonathan happened to pass by and offered to fix it. He said he was training and that it would be a favor if she let him try." Frank smiled. Jonathan was truly internalizing the values he had learned there. But not everything was perfect. At Jonathan's company, some partners grew concerned about his change in behavior. "Jonathan, you're neglecting the business," his main partner complained. "You spend all day playing mechanic and losing focus on what really matters." "What really matters?" Jonathan questioned. "Money, profit, growth, not this nonsense about helping the poor." Jonathan felt deeply unsettled by those words. He realized he was drifting away from the values that had guided his business life for years. "You know what? Maybe I have lost focus, but I lost focus on the wrong things and found focus on the right ones." Tension in the company grew. Jonathan began to be questioned in meetings, pressured to return to his old ways, held accountable for results he now considered less important. It was Frank who noticed Jonathan was going through an inner conflict. "Mr. Jonathan, you seem worried. Want to talk?" Jonathan shared the problems at the company, the pressure he was under, how he felt torn between two worlds. "Frank, sometimes I think it would be easier to go back to how I was before. At least I didn't have these conflicts." "Mr. Jonathan, do you know the story of the man who found treasure?" "No." "A man was digging in his backyard and found a chest full of gold coins. He was overjoyed, but he also grew worried. What if someone stole it? What if others found out? What if it was all an illusion?" Know what he did? "What?" "He buried the treasure again and pretended he'd never found anything. But for the rest of his life he was unhappy, knowing the treasure was there and that he'd chosen not to have it." Jonathan understood the parable. "Are you saying I've found treasure and I'm thinking of burying it again?" "I'm saying you've discovered something valuable about life and yourself. If you turn back, you'll spend the rest of your days knowing it could have been different." This conversation was decisive for Jonathan. He chose to face the conflicts at the company rather than run from them. He called a meeting with all the partners and senior staff. Ethan was spending his school break at the shop, so Jonathan brought him along. "I want you to see where I've been spending my free time," Jonathan said, introducing Ethan and talking about his friendship with Frank. The reaction was mixed. Some found it interesting, others saw it as eccentric, and a few viewed it as a social marketing opportunity. "Jonathan, we could use this to improve our image," the marketing director suggested. "A campaign showing how you care for the less fortunate." "No," Jonathan said firmly, "this isn't marketing. It's real life." Jonathan explained he wasn't abandoning the company, but intended to restructure how he worked. He wanted a more humanized company with genuine social responsibility, not just for publicity. The change wasn't easy. Some partners walked away, believing Jonathan had lost his way. Others, however, were intrigued by the new vision and wanted to join the transformation. Ethan witnessed it all and was proud of his father. "Dad, you're being brave," the boy said one day as they left the shop. "Why do you say that, Ethan?" "Because you're choosing to do what's right even when it's hard." His 9-year-old son's words deeply moved Jonathan. He was teaching Ethan a lesson in integrity that would last a lifetime. Months later, Frank received an unexpected proposal from Jonathan. "Frank, how about we create a vocational training program here in the neighborhood?" "How do you mean, Mr. Jonathan?" "You could teach mechanics to young people in the community. I'd help with the structure and secure partnerships so they could get jobs afterward." Frank liked the idea but wanted to understand better. "And what would you gain from this?" "I'd gain the satisfaction of seeing young people get opportunities, and Ethan would learn early on the importance of helping others." The project was implemented by the end of that year. Frank began teaching mechanics 3 times a week to groups of young people between 16 and 25. Jonathan secured partnerships with transportation companies and local repair shops to guarantee internships and jobs. Ethan, even though he was younger, participated as an assistant, learning both mechanics and social responsibility. The program was a success. Within 6 months, over 30 young people had been trained, and most had secured jobs in the field. Jennifer took on coordinating the social assistance side of the project, helping the youths with paperwork, career guidance, and family support. Emily, inspired by the environment, decided she wanted to study to become a teacher so she could educate other children the way her father taught the young adults. The project caught the attention of the local press. Stories were written about the unlikely partnership between the billionaire businessman and the neighborhood mechanic. "How did this friendship begin?" a reporter asked during an interview. Frank looked at Jonathan and smiled. "It began when 2 fathers met, both wanting the best for their children." "And what was the secret to making it work?" Jonathan replied, "The secret was realizing it doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters is how much love you have to give." The story made waves, and other companies became interested in replicating the model. Jonathan and Frank were soon invited to give talks and consultations on social responsibility. But they always made it clear there was no magic formula. What worked for them was building a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. 2 years after their first meeting in the repair shop, Jonathan reflected on how much his life had changed. Ethan had become a more confident and compassionate child. He had real friends, understood the value of hard work, and knew the importance of honesty. Jonathan's company, even after some long-time partners had stepped away, was more prosperous than ever. The new business philosophy, focused on sustainability and social responsibility, had attracted clients and investors who valued those principles. Frank had become a pillar of the community. His shop was seen as a symbol of dignity and integrity. The training program had expanded to other areas, including computer skills and entrepreneurship courses. Jennifer had fully recovered and discovered a calling for social work, now coordinating 3 different community projects. Emily had become an exemplary student, inspired by the generosity she witnessed at home every day. One Sunday afternoon, the 2 families were gathered at the shop, organizing a new training class, when Jonathan made an observation. "Frank, do you remember the day I offered you the job as my driver?" "I do, Mr. Jonathan. If you'd accepted, none of this would have happened." Frank paused and looked at his friend. "Mr. Jonathan, if I'd accepted, I would have become your employee. But because I refused, we became friends." Ethan, listening to the conversation, said something that surprised the adults. "Dad, Uncle Frank didn't just fix my bike that day. He fixed our whole family." Jennifer was moved by the boy's words. "It's true, Ethan. Sometimes a small kindness can change everything." Jonathan hugged his son, proud of the maturity he'd developed. "Ethan, you've learned life's most important lesson, that true wealth lies in caring for one another." Frank Miller watched the scene with gratitude for all that had happened. He could never have imagined that fixing a bicycle for free would lead to such profound changes for so many people. That evening, as the families said their goodbyes, Jonathan Bennett shared one final thought. "Frank, I came here thinking I had something to offer you, but I discovered you had far more to offer me. You gave me things I could never have achieved alone, Mr. Bennett." "Like what?" "The chance to help more people. Alone, I could fix bicycles. With your help, we fixed lives." Jonathan smiled, knowing Frank was right. "But you're the one who taught me that fixing lives matters more than building empires." As they walked home, each with their own family, both knew their friendship had permanently changed their lives. Ethan held his father's hand, excitedly sharing plans for the next day at the workshop. Emily did the same with Frank, thrilled about the possibilities of helping more children through their projects. Jennifer and Jonathan walked side by side, discussing new community initiatives like respectful colleagues who admired one another. It was the end of another day at the workshop, a place that had become far more than just a workplace. It was proof that different people could come together when they shared a common purpose. Frank glanced back at his shop before closing the door. The tools were organized, the workbenches clean, everything ready for another day. But now he knew his work had expanded far beyond fixing vehicles. Jonathan got into his modest car. He had traded the limousine for something simpler and waved at Frank through the window. Ethan waved too, already planning to return the next morning to help with a new class. As he drove home, Jonathan reflected on how one simple decision, letting Ethan play in that humble neighborhood, had completely changed his outlook on life. When they arrived, Ethan rushed to his room to sketch the bicycles they had repaired that day. It was his new hobby, documenting through drawings all the stories he witnessed at the workshop. Jonathan went to his home office, not to work, but to write in the journal he had started, recording the daily lessons he learned from Frank and his family. That night he wrote, "Today marks 2 years since Ethan first got a flat tire on his bike. If someone had told me then that a simple mechanic would completely change my life, I wouldn't have believed it. But I've learned that the greatest transformations come from the most unlikely encounters. Frank taught me that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we give." And Ethan learned that friendship knows no social class. Across town, Frank was also writing in his notebook, a habit Jonathan had taught him. "Jonathan came here wanting to hire me. He left hired for life as a true friend. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken his job offer. We'd probably both be frustrated now, him for failing to buy my friendship, me for selling my dignity. But because we chose mutual respect, we gained something no money can buy: an extended family." Jennifer sat in the living room reading, pausing now and then to watch Frank write. She was proud of how her husband had stayed true to his principles, even when it was hard. Emily organized her school supplies for the next day, but was already looking forward to the weekend, when she could help at the workshop again. He had discovered that he enjoyed teaching the younger kids how to take care of their bikes. The next morning, Frank arrived at the workshop earlier than usual. He wanted to get everything ready for the new group of young people in the training program. As he organized the tools, he thought about how his life had become more complex, but also richer. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was an educator, a mentor, a role model in the community. Jonathan arrived shortly after, bringing the teaching materials he had ordered. Ethan came running behind him, excited for another day of learning and mutual support. "Good morning, Uncle Frank," Ethan shouted, before even reaching the door. "Good morning, champ. Ready for another day of work?" "Always ready," Jonathan greeted Frank with a hug, as had become their custom. "How are you feeling about starting another group?" "Excited, Mr. Jonathan. Every new group is a chance to change more lives. And Ethan is learning a lot, just by watching all this." Frank looked at the boy, who was already wearing his little overalls and organizing the smaller tools. "Ethan is learning the most important lesson, that we can be happy by helping others be happy too." Throughout the morning, the 15 young people selected for the new group arrived. They came from different neighborhoods in the area, all with tough stories but eager to learn and change their lives. Frank welcomed them as he always did, with simplicity and warmth. Jonathan stayed in the background, watching how his friend instantly created an atmosphere of trust and respect. "Everyone, welcome to our workshop," Frank said. "Here, you'll learn much more than mechanics. You'll learn about dignity, honesty, and teamwork. Ethan introduced himself to the group as Uncle Frank's assistant and explained that he was still learning too, even though he was younger. Age doesn't matter when you want to help, the boy said with the ease of someone who had fully absorbed the values he saw every day. During the first lesson, Frank taught the basics, but always connected technical knowledge to human values. When you're fixing someone's bike, remember that it might be their only means of transportation. Treat it with care because you're handling someone's dignity. Jonathan watched everything, moved by his friend's simple yet profound wisdom. He remembered how he had first arrived thinking he had lessons to teach, only to realize he needed to learn almost everything about life and human relationships. At the end of the first lesson, one of the young men approached Frank. "Teacher, do you really think we can get a good job after this course?" Frank looked into the young man's eyes and saw the uncertainty of someone who had been doubted many times before. "Son, I can't promise you'll get a job, but I can promise you'll leave here with dignity and knowledge, and no one can ever take that away from you." Jonathan stepped forward and added, "And I can promise we'll do everything possible to make sure you get opportunities to show what you've learned." The young man smiled, feeling for the first time in a long while that there were people genuinely invested in his success. When the group left, Frank, Jonathan, and Ethan stayed behind, talking about the first day. "Dad, did you see how happy they were?" Ethan asked. "I did, son. And did you like helping?" "I loved it. I want to keep helping always." Frank smiled at Jonathan. "Mr. Jonathan, you're raising a very special son." "We're raising him, Frank. Ethan is learning just as much from you as from me." It was true. Ethan had become a boy who combined the best of both worlds, the refined upbringing he received at home with the human values he absorbed in the workshop. Months passed, and that class graduated with a 100% success rate. All 15 young people secured jobs or opportunities to start their own businesses in the automotive field. The graduation ceremony was moving. Held in the neighborhood park, it brought together families, employers, local officials, and the entire community. Frank was honored as Teacher of the Year by the Residents Association. Jonathan received an award for corporate social responsibility. But the most emotional moment came when Ethan stepped up to the microphone to speak. "I want to thank Uncle Frank for teaching my dad how to be a better person. And I want to thank my dad for letting Uncle Frank teach me how to be a better kid." The audience was touched by the boy's maturity and simplicity. "And I want to tell all the kids here today, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. What matters is if you're good." Frank discreetly wiped away a tear. Jonathan couldn't hold back his emotions and cried openly. Jennifer, who was in the audience with Emily, felt proud seeing how her husband had positively impacted so many lives. Emily whispered to her mother, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be just like Dad and Uncle Jonathan." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I want to help people and be friends with everyone." After the ceremony, Frank and Jonathan walked together through the square, watching families mingling, the graduates talking with their new employers, and children playing with the bikes that had been repaired during the course. "Frank, do you remember when I said I wanted to buy your services?" "I do, Mr. Jonathan. Today I know what you offer is priceless. And the ironic thing is, precisely because it's priceless, it ended up being the most valuable investment of my life." Frank stopped walking and looked at his friend. "Mr. Jonathan, can I confess something?" "Of course. At first I didn't trust you. I thought you were just another rich guy trying to promote yourself at the expense of the poor." Jonathan laughed. "And you were right to be suspicious. At first I really didn't know what my true motivation was." "What changed?" "Ethan changed. When I saw my son truly happy for the first time in years, I realized you had something I needed to learn, not buy." Frank reflected on the answer. "You know, Mr. Jonathan, maybe that was the secret. Neither of us tried to change the other. We just stayed open to learning." "That's true. I learned from you to value what really matters. You learned from me how to expand the reach of the help you were already giving." Ethan came running up, interrupting the adults' conversation. "Dad, Uncle Frank." More people came wanting to sign up for the next course. Jonathan and Frank exchanged glances and smiled. "Looks like our work is just beginning," Jonathan said. "And thank goodness for that," Frank replied. That night, when the square emptied and each family went home, Frank stayed a few more minutes looking at his workshop. 2.5 years had passed since that afternoon when Ethan showed up with a flat tire. Who could have imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead to so many changes? His workshop was still a workshop, but now it was also a hub for social transformation. Jonathan was still a businessman, but now he was also a true friend and a present father. Ethan had grown into a child aware of his privileges and responsibilities. Jennifer had discovered a calling she never knew she had. Emily had found a life model based on generosity, and hundreds of young people had opportunities they might never have had if that unlikely friendship hadn't blossomed. Frank locked up the workshop and walked home, thinking about how small choices can have big consequences. Choosing to fix a bike for free, choosing to trust an unlikely friendship, choosing to keep his dignity instead of accepting charity, choosing to teach instead of just working. Each choice had opened doors to new possibilities, creating a cycle of positive changes that spread far beyond what any of them could have imagined. Jonathan was also reflecting on all this as he drove home with Ethan. The boy had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, tired but happy after a full day helping with the graduation. "Ethan," Jonathan whispered, "thank you for teaching me that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we share." The boy didn't wake up, but he smiled in his sleep, as if he'd heard. The next day, a new class would begin. 15 more young people would have the chance to learn a trade, and more importantly, values that would stay with them for life. Frank would arrive early to prepare everything. Jonathan would show up soon after with Ethan. Jennifer would coordinate the social side. Emily would help with the younger children who came along with their older siblings. It was the start of another cycle of transformation, built on the solid foundation of a friendship that began in the simplest way possible, an adult who genuinely cared about a child's happiness. And so Frank's workshop kept fixing much more than vehicles. It fixed dreams, hopes, relationships, and lives. One bike at a time, one person at a time, one family at a time. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of friendship and transformation. Do you believe small acts of kindness can truly change entire lives? Share in the comments your own experiences of how generosity has impacted your life. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories that show the power of humanity and solidarity.